What's up, everybody? Happy Saturday. Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. My name is Andy Herman. Thanks so much for joining me today. Going to be focusing primarily on the NFL draft, which I'm actually very excited about. I know Aaron Rodgers and the whole situation is still hanging over our heads and really has been, obviously, since last Thursday. And that's why I'm kind of really excited just to kind of dig in and talk about the draft. The draft is one of my favorite things every single year. And of course, since last Thursday, the focus and primary focus has been completely on Aaron Rodgers, and for that, didn't get to spend as much time as I would have liked to just kind of break down the draft and what teams did well. And I know I spent a little bit of time on it, discuss kind of what the NFC North did and things like that. But today I just wanted to kind of have some fun and go over my top 10 draft classes from this year, plus one honorable mention. I thought a lot of teams did really well. And before I get there, I'll just go very quickly. I know a lot of you yesterday in the comments wanted me to focus on Adam Schefter, and one, I don't know that I have the energy to go through all of that. It's a insanely hot button topic. Ultimately, Aaron Rodgers is some level of upset with Green Bay, and we didn't know that last Thursday, and we do know that now. There's a million different ways that not even probably could have been handled better, right? I don't think I'm going out of bounds by saying that. Ultimately, whether the Rodgers stuff, whether, from a court of public opinion, it made it look like it was Rodgers' fault or the Packers' fault or whatever. Yeah, it's all a mess, right? It's all very, very messy. And I think it's fair to say that entire situation of how that information got released could have been handled better. Ultimately, as a consumer of information and of football information, we didn't know it as of Thursday. We did know it because of Adam Schefter on Thursday, and everyone is sort of confirmed to varying, differing degrees, I should say, the reports of that. I don't think the one thing I'll mention here is I don't like, some people have just said, well, it's all made up. Aaron Rodgers and the Packers are fine. I don't get how you get to that conclusion, right? So again, I don't want to go into it in a ton of detail here, but mostly because I think you'll probably disagree with my stance on it. But I do think that ultimately that all could have been handled much, much better wording, better phrasing, and better timing, right? But as Packer fans, we did not know about it up until that point. That was the first information that we got of it. And it's obviously insanely important information to know. And I don't think it's just this made up thing pulled out of the ether. There's obviously some level of truth to it, just based on what we know and everything that's come out since that point. Mark Murphy and Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur don't go down to visit with them on multiple occasions if everything's okay, right? They've confirmed, Mark Murphy has confirmed that there's issues here. So it's not to say that it can't get worked out. And again, I think over the last handful of days, this has tended to trend in a positive direction, which is fantastic. And as I've mentioned on numerous occasions, the best possible outcome here is for there to be a reconciliation on all parties, figure it out, get on the same page. And again, not just Aaron Rodgers coming back, but Aaron Rodgers wanting to be in Green Bay. If that can happen, awesome, fantastic. Let's make that happen. Sounds like a couple people, James Jones has volunteered to, do that. Nick Van Exel, the former point guard, is tweeted out that he's willing to take on the general manager mantle to make this happen. Whatever it takes, I'm all in on it. Let's go from there and see what we can do here. So that's all I'll touch base on that today. But thank you for those who have put the questions out there in the comments. Maybe I'll do an episode on it at some point, but we'll see. That's all I have to say on it as of right now. All right, let's go to the top 10 draft classes from the 2021 draft. And of course, again, I'm not saying, and again, really quick tirade here, like people get all upset about draft grades and who had the best draft and things like that. We all had ideas of the players that were good and should go where prior to the draft, and where we, which players we thought we wanted in Green Bay. What you're looking at here is which teams got the best values. We know that some dude in the 6th round that got picked randomly that none of us ever heard of is going to go out and kill it and have an all-pro career, right? We know that literally half the guys in the 1st round are going to bust out in 4 to 5 years, and everyone's going to point back and say, wow, those guys really busted. It happens every single year. But what we're evaluating today is just the value that teams got. We know some of these guys are going to bust. We know all of these aren't necessarily going to be perfect draft classes, but these were some of the ones that stood out to me through last weekend's NFL draft. So first of all, honorable mention to the Seattle Seahawks. A lot of these teams that are going to end up in these top 10 lists are teams that had a ton of draft capital or gave up future first round picks to move up and things like that, right? Like those are the teams that do incredibly well. But I want to give a shout out to the Seattle Seahawks. They had 3 picks in this draft. And I don't think they had like this insane draft class, right? It's Dwayne Eskridge, Trey Brown, and Stone Forsythe. A very forgettable draft, but 3 guys that I actually liked. So the odds that you get only 3 picks like later in the draft, and I was a fan of all 3 of them. I thought, given the draft capital that they had, I thought that was actually a pretty sound return on investment. Again, considering it was 3 mid-round picks. So kudos to the Seahawks for making the most out of what was not a great draft situation to be in, I guess I'll say. Number 10 on my list is the Washington football team. I really like the selection of Jamin Davis, inside linebacker. I thought he was one of the best pure linebackers in this draft. I think he's going to be able to make an insane impact behind that incredibly ridiculous Washington defensive line. They come back and get Sam Cosmi, I think, who has the opportunity to be a long-term tackle on the outside, may need a little bit of development. They have a need at left tackle. They've got a couple different pieces that can kind of fit in there if need be, but I think he could come in and play left tackle sooner rather than later for them. Ben St-Juste is one of the really unique unicorns in this draft. Just, one of these big, tall corners that you look at and you're like, all right, that guy's not going to be able to hang with some, like, he has ridiculous agility. Like, you just don't see very many players like him. He was one of the more intriguing players in this draft for me. De'Ami Brown, who I know a lot of people liked, explosive wide receiver. They get him a little bit later. And of course, they should get a ton of credit for drafting, and the Packers missed out on a huge opportunity here. Long snapper, Cameron Cheeseman. Like, Brian Gutekunst, I don't care what happened with Aaron Rodgers. The fact that you found a way to not end this draft with getting Cameron Cheeseman, that is a fireable offense, no matter what happens with the Rodgers situation. So Cameron Cheeseman ends up in Washington. It doesn't even make any damn sense, but they get credit for that nonetheless. And then I thought Shaka Toney and Dax Milne were 2 late round flyers that I really liked as well. Number 9 was the Washington football team, or not the Washington football team, I just went over them. The New York Giants, excuse me. Kadarius Toney, I think, is going to be an explosive playmaker. Daniel Jones isn't obviously going to be the most accurate down the field thrower, so give him weapons that you can get in intermediate and short touches like Saquon Barkley and Kadarius Toney, and let them do the legwork and literally and make the explosive plays. So based on who they have at quarterback, I think that was a really smart decision. They get Azeez Ojulari in the 2nd round, and then Aaron Robinson is a player that I think has the ability to be one of the best slot corners in this draft. They get him 3rd round. And then Ellerson Smith, I think, has the ability to come in and be a rotational pass rusher from day one and could have developed even above and beyond that as his career goes on. Rodarius Williams, even a really nice flyer pick in late rounds, has the size, the speed, the strength, everything that you would want. Kind of just had like a mediocre career at OK State, but he's a really fun prospect that when you look at him, he passes the eye test. So I thought the Giants did a really great job. Number 8, the New England Patriots. Now, part of this is because I'm higher on Mac Jones than most, and I think he goes into this perfect situation for him. And also, New England gets their quarterback without having to give up, a ton of first-round picks. I thought this was just a logical draft choice for them, and then they come back and get Christian Barmore, who a lot of people had, pegged as a first-round pick, and they get him in the 2nd round. So even if you felt like Mac Jones was a 2nd rounder and Christian Barmore was a 1st rounder, like swap the 2 and you still end up with pretty good value here. I personally had Jones as a 1st and Barmore as a 2nd. Either way, I think they get good value. They come back later and get Ronnie Perkins, who had none of the athletic testing that you would generally want. Listen, it takes a ton for me to like players who don't test well athletically. Perkins tested mostly terribly, and I loved the player. There's just every once in a while, put it this way, for a player like that who doesn't test well athletically to go still where he goes in the draft, he has to be doing a ton of stuff right. And more often than not, as pass rushers, production matters. Like if you see guys getting sacks in high school and getting sacks or pressures, whatever you want to measure here, like they usually tend to translate to sacks in the NFL. Like in a way, like look for guys who just have a knack for getting to the quarterback. And I think Ronnie Perkins has that. So really like that pick. Cameron McGrone was such a Patriots pick and a really good fit for their defensive scheme. And then Trey Nixon, a really solid developmental player that they took a flyer on from UCF at wide receiver in the 7th round. So really liked their draft as well. Next up is the New York Jets. I mean, first of all, they get Zach Wilson. They addressed their long-term quarterback need. Loved moving up for Elijah Vera Tucker, one of the best offensive linemen. People might say, well, moving up in the 1st to get an interior offensive lineman, this is I don't want to give too much praise to a rookie here, but to me, he evaluated as an Elton Jenkins, right? Can come in and play left guard at a very high level from day one, but can also kick to left tackle, right guard, like just so much versatility. We see how valuable that is to Green Bay. I think he brings that same level of play and versatility to the Jets. Smart pick there. And then they get Elijah Moore, who I know everyone, myself included, thought he'd be a first round pick. He ends up going in the second. They get to pair him with Zach Wilson. Love that. And then one of my favorite players in the draft, Michael Carter, the running back from North Carolina. Again, somebody that didn't have the testing numbers of those top few backs, but man, you watch him on tape, and to me, he is one of the most fun running backs in this class by far. I think he's going to be able to come in and contribute right away. Jason Pinnock is another player they drafted who I think has the ability, like if you told me a few years down the line he ended up being one of the steals of this draft as a corner, would not shock me one bit. So really thought the Jets did a nice job in this draft. Next up is the LA Chargers. Basically, I'm giving it to them for their first two picks, Rashawn Slater and Asante Samuel. A couple picks later, Chris Rumph and Brendan James are some nice developmental players. I didn't love the rest of their draft, but go back to Tampa Bay a season ago. They got Tristan Wirfs, and then they got Winfield, Antoine Winfield Jr. from Minnesota. Like the rest of their draft was mostly fine. Tyler Johnson was a pretty solid pick. If they got everything else wrong, but they got Tristan Wirfs and those first two picks correct, and Antoine Winfield correct, like what more do you possibly want? And I think this has the ability to be a Tampa Bay Buccaneers style draft with getting Rashawn Slater and Asante Samuel in those first two rounds. So kudos to the LA Chargers. Next up, the Detroit Lions. I'm not going to talk too much about them because I went over them in great detail the other day, but Penei Sewell, Levi Onwuzurike, Aleem McNeil, Fatu Melifonwu, Amon-Ra St. Brown. First of all, just an all name here, right? Penei Sewell, Levi Onwuzurike, Fatu Melifonwu, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like that is an all vocabulary team, but really like them as players as well. It is insanely rare for you to pick, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys in a draft and like anyone to like all of them, right? I liked all of their picks. Like I didn't look at any of them and be like, wow, can't see why they went there. Like I wasn't a huge Aleem McNeil guy, but he's a good player. But to have solid grades on all 7 guys and not go too far off the board, I really like that draft for the Lions. All right, next up, the Miami Dolphins. Just Jalen Waddle. You go back and watch him, and he is so dynamic and so explosive. And again, you get to pair him with Tua, who played with him in college. I know maybe that's a little bit of a rich pick there, but I think he's going to fit in so well with that team. And then they come back and get Jalen Phillips, who I think has the ability to be the best edge rusher in this class. Javon Holland, I know a lot of people had first-round grades on him. I had more of a second-round grade, but again, fantastic pick for their secondary in the early second round. And then Liam Eichenberg, again, first round grade there. He goes in the second round. I think he has the ability to be a long-term tackle for them. Hunter Long, a really nice tight end that I think is going to play a part in their depth chart as well. So kudos to the Dolphins on their draft. That brings us to the top 3. Carolina Panthers, number 3. J.C. Horn getting in the first round. I think the only reason I don't have Carolina higher is I think you have to question not getting a quarterback. They had the ability to get a Justin Fields. They had the ability to get a Mac Jones. And to just not address it at all, I think is interesting. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm not huge on Sam Darnold. So yes, they got him. I would still like to hedge your bets, and maybe I just don't know how you pass on Justin Fields in that situation. So they go with J.C. Horn, who I love, and I think was the best corner in this draft. Terrace Marshall, they come back and has the ability to be not only a possession receiver, but a dynamic possession receiver. Brady Christensen has the profile to be a long-term left tackle. Tommy Tremble is, again, I think is going to be somebody that's going to be able to come in and compete right away at tight end for them. Not only a dynamic, has the ability to be a good receiver, but a fantastic blocker, H-back, fullback, tight end. He can do it all. Chuba Hubbard is interesting. Davion Nixon, I thought, was one of the steals of day 3. And then Keith Taylor, corner out of Washington. I think he has some unique profile. Now, everyone in Green Bay would have hated Keith Taylor because there's a lot of Kevin King similarities. But the difference here is I think you get Keith Taylor in like the 4th or 5th round. Kevin King went early 2nd, right? So a lot of difference there. And then Deontay Brown, I think, has the ability to be a starter from Alabama at guard. They get him in, I think, 4th or 5th round as well. So really nice job. Really, really nice job by the Carolina Panthers navigating this draft, save for maybe just not coming away with that quarterback. The number 2 on my list is the Cleveland Browns. First of all, they got 2 of my absolute favorite players in this draft, and Greg Newsome and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. I mean, I went back afterwards after Koramoah slipped, and I watched more and more of him. I just am in love with the player. And as I mentioned before, those off-ball linebackers who are playing in the slot that don't have to take on offensive linemen, you have to be careful. But I watch him more and more. I think his strength, his physicality, his ability to take on blocks is better than some of those other players who have failed from, making that transition in the past. I think he's just a dynamic playmaker. And then I think you just get one of the best, most all-around corners in this draft in Newsome, where if he didn't have the injuries, I think he goes top 10. So I love that. And then they get 2 playmakers in Anthony Schwartz and Demetric Felton that just fit that offense perfectly. And Kevin Stefanski is definitely going to have plays in mind for both of those players. So you love the scheme fits for both of those. James Hudson, I think, is a flyer as a potential long-term tackle. And then Tommy Tagai, I think, has the ability to be a rotational defensive tackle from day one. Really like that pick for the Cleveland Browns. And then last but not least, and this might be a bit aggressive, but I think what you look for in accomplishing in a draft, you have to give credit to the Chicago Bears. This is a franchise that, frankly, if they don't come away with a quarterback in this draft, you are looking at a full-on rebuild. They're going to be, a bad team with Andy Dalton at starting quarterback. Some of their older players or some of their star players are starting to age a little bit, specifically Khalil Mack. They lose Fuller in free agency. There's not much hope or optimism on that team going into that season if you're the Bears. And to now all of a sudden go to having a ton of hope and optimism with Justin Fields, coming away with a quarterback that I think has a ton of talent, and then coming back and being aggressive in the second round and getting help for that offensive line in Tevin Jenkins. Those are 2 home run picks. Now, both are high risk, high reward. So there's definitely still a level of risk here. And if Fields doesn't turn out and you miss again and you gave up another future first round pick, and the amount of egg that the Bears will have on their face is insane. But you've infused hope into this franchise. If you're Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, you literally probably saved your job for a couple more years by investing in a quarterback, again, the level of Justin Fields. And I think, again, just getting Tevin Jenkins in the second was a fantastic pick, regardless of how you look at things. So also, as I mentioned earlier, liked how they've, a couple days ago, liked some of the prospects I got late in the draft. Khalil Herbert, Daz Newsome, Thomas Graham, Kyrus Tonga, think all have the ability to make it in the NFL. So that's all you're looking for on late day 3. So really nice job by the Chicago Bears, as much as it pains me to say that. That's going to do it for me. Make sure to check out today's audio podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Please make sure to subscribe and like if you have not already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.